Hello, my name is Eugene Chausovsky, and I'm a Eurasia analyst here at Stratfor. Joining me today is Paul Floyd, Stratfor's military analyst, and we'll be discussing the latest situation in Ukraine. So, Paul, we've had a ceasefire announced as part of the new President Poroshenko's peace plan, and it hasn't held up as we expected it wouldn't. What's the latest on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, we've just seen continued low-grade violence. The Slavyansk region and the immediate vicinity of that, we had another helicopter get shot down where we've seen several helicopters get shot down. We know they have a capability to shoot down aircraft. While that was before the ceasefire, it's continued since then. We've also seen kind of low-grade shooting incidences and small arms fire and mortars, if you will, along the border. There's also been an interesting kind of campaign that's kind of really picked up steam, which is this bombing of infrastructure, specifically rail lines. So kind of this attempt to prevent the Ukrainian military's ability to move a lot of its material into the region seems to be the reason for doing that.
Right. So we've seen that Russia has shown some signs of becoming more accommodational, or at least, willing to come to the table. We've seen Russia basically withdraw its threat to intervene militarily, but yet these attacks still keep on happening, and we still have some tacit support, from Russia to these rebel groups. So what's basically the structure of that support at this point?
As far as we can tell, it looks like there's a small, very professional cadre that's either been trained or they are working directly by the Russians or for the Russians. And they're kind of the nucleus of the resistance in the region. But built around that, you have separatist Ukrainians who are true believers and do not like what's happening in Kiev and the orientation of Kiev currently, the Kiev government. And so that's why you kind of have this bizarre matrix of very professional attacks and ambushes and shooting down of aircraft with high-grade weaponry, and then also these kind of almost amateurish attacks in different places, depending on what you're talking about. A lot of the professionalism, that cadre I'm talking about, seems to be centered mostly on the Slavyansk region, where we've seen the most serious fighting and where the Ukrainian military has been concentrating and where they've been rebuffed the most by far.
Right. So I think it's an important point to make that, Russia does not control these separatists outright. Correct? I mean, certainly it doesn't control every single action that they take, every single attack that they make on the Ukrainian security forces. But I think it would be fair to say that Russia has a great degree of influence among the separatists, at least some of the hardcore, well-armed kinds.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the structure. Countries have a hard time controlling their military sometimes, and that's an absolute hierarchy and structure if they don't have enough training and oversight of just even their own military. That being said, in this case, we've got that small nucleus or cadre that's kind of trying to influence and shape these pro-Russian separatists. But it's a much looser structure, much more of a blob or amoeba-like. And because of that, their ability to directly control what's happening in eastern Ukraine is going to be very limited. So it's more like they can influence. They can send in small arms. They can support them. They can send in these professional guys who can give them some directionality and give them some experience, give them some ideas. But the idea that all of a sudden they can turn it off necessarily is not there. They only can kind of influence so much.
Sure, yeah. They may not be able to turn it off, but I think it is fair to say that they can dial it up and dial it down.
Absolutely.
Which is notable in the context of, this peace plan being announced, the ceasefire. Russia has shown some positive signals from that, but I think we're still very far from Russia being satisfied with the situation.
Right.
And I think that's reflected in the fact that these separatist attacks are still occurring. This is coming as negotiations are taking place between Russia, Ukraine, and the EU over the future of Ukraine, the future of the government. But Russia's ultimate goal in Ukraine is the country's neutralization, meaning that it does not become a part of the Western alliance structure, whether that's EU or down the line potentially NATO. And as long as the Ukrainian government continues to make moves towards the EU, which it's still currently doing, it's going to be signing a pretty important free trade deal with the EU this Friday, and they're making indications that they want to continue that orientation. Then I think that Russia's broader support of the separatist groups, the rebels in eastern Ukraine, will continue.
Absolutely. I mean, the key there being, we're in negotiations. We have not reach the final endpoint where Russia would be satisfied or feel comfortable. Think of the separatists as a tool, and that tool is providing leverage against Kiev and its ability to have a sovereign country and do what it needs to do. And Russia's not going to take that tool away and eliminate that leverage until it gets somewhere where it wants to be. So even though we have traction and everyone's saying the right words diplomatically, yeah, that tool is absolutely going to stay there and at least simmer to make sure that Kiev, to a point, is compliant and everyone understands what's potentially possible. And also, you're right, they can turn it back up if things start to go south in the sense of what Russia wants. They can easily turn up the pressure again very quickly. They don't want to have to, start from scratch, if you will, by removing it completely before the negotiations are even over.
Right, exactly. So Russia has basically an array of tools that it can use and that it will use, the separatists being one of them, but also you have, just the cultural, political influence in all of eastern, southern Ukraine. We're seeing the separatist activity being concentrated right now in Luhansk and Donetsk, but Russia has a number of levers that it can use and that it will continue to use as long as the Ukrainian government continues with its Western path. So what we really have to watch for now, not only the fighting that's happening in eastern Ukraine, right, but the political situation in Kiev itself, which Kiev has become much more quiet since the initial uprising happened, a few months ago. But that's actually where the real action is taking place.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a direct correlation between the talks between Kiev and Moscow and the level of violence on the ground. And the more acrimonious the talks become, the higher the level of violence will become.
Okay, so I think we can leave it there. Paul, thanks very much for this discussion, and thank you for watching.